Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Homeowners associations, or HOAs, are a popular topic on this channel and in life in general. People like to talk about the HOAs. And so Jeff and a whole bunch of other people sent me a note. So Steve, check out the story from The Guardian, written by Richard Luscombe. Curbing the Karens. Florida reins in over mighty homeowners groups. And I apologize. I know there's some people in the audience named Karen, and it's just become one of those things where that name got attached to the notion, and I feel sorry because I've got some friends named Karen. So the state's homeowners associations in Florida are notorious for petty bureaucracy, including threats of eviction for the wrong kind of dog or decorative garage door hinges. Now, here's the thing. This happens in many states. I've heard of this in Michigan. I've heard of it in Arizona. I've heard of it in California. I've heard of it all over the place. But the homeowners association has been making the news more often because so many people are like, okay, I'm fed up with this. I've had too much. So if you had to name the state where a war veteran almost lost his apartment for owning the wrong kind of dog, or in which a ring of thieves made off with millions of dollars of residents' money that they were supposed to be looking after, or where a family was threatened with legal action over decorative garage door hinges, intuition might lead you to Florida. Such absurdities from homeowners associations abound where the nation's highest concentration of condominium developments, gated communities, and upmarket resorts blend seamlessly with an abundance of petty bureaucracy and outright crookedness. I can tell you, I was driving through Florida one time, and I was just buzzing around the dial looking for radio stations, which I like to do when I'm driving, especially in other states. And I came across a radio show on a Saturday or Sunday morning dedicated entirely to homeowners associations and how to deal with them. But now, thanks to a bill signed into law by the governor last week, things should change. On July 1st, there will be unprecedented new curbs on the power and excesses of HOAs, which are, of course, the ultra-local panels of government that decide what color your front door should be and how clean you need to keep your mailbox in pursuit of high standards of maintenance and aesthetics. No more can residents be cited or fined for trivial transgressions like leaving their trash cans out beyond collection day, or having holiday lights and decorations still hanging after the last visitors have returned home. And they must be given 14 days written notice and a hearing and appeals. And I've told this story before. I lived someplace briefly where it was a condominium, but condominium associations are very similar. And I'd take my garbage out in the morning, and the garbage man would come by and pick it up, and then they would put the can back. And a couple of times I put the garbage out late at night because the garbage man came by at like 6 in the morning. It was crazy. And so I put the garbage out really, really late at night. And the next morning when I got my can, a couple of days later, I got a thing in the mail, goes, $25 fine. Your can was tipped over. Someone tipped your can over. That's $25 for you, my friend. So I appealed it. And the only thing you do is write a letter saying, I don't think I should pay this because the can wasn't tipped over. I put it out. For all I know, someone else tipped it over. And they denied my appeal and said, it's $25, pay it. Your can was tipped over. Now, the funny part was the garbage man took all the garbage. And the garbage can had been tipped over. I believe it was still dark out, so nobody even saw it. But they actually had a person who drove around at night in a golf cart checking garbage cans. And if they saw a garbage can tipped over, they would dig through the garbage like animals, look for correspondence, find out what address it was attached to, and then send a $25 bill and say, you owe us $25. It was absurd. But yes, I admit I was living there and I'd seen the rules, but I thought they would never fine somebody $25 just like somebody kicks the can over and 5 minutes later it gets picked up by a garbage man. But that's pretty much what happened in my case. I don't know how long it was on the ground, tipped over. And as several people pointed out to me, how do you know that person in the golf cart didn't tip it over? For all you know, they go out and kick cans over and make $25 per can. So anyone seeking to become an HOA board member will be required to be trained and regulated, a blow to Florida's army of overzealous and autocratic people who revel in controlling even the smallest details of residents' existence. I've heard of homeowners associations where the board will go out and walk the neighborhood periodically, every couple weeks, once a month, taking notes of what they see. And I've spoken to somebody, for instance, who said that they bought a house in a homeowner association. There's a privacy fence around their backyard, and in their backyard was a shed up against the house that you could only see from inside the backyard. And somehow they got a letter one day that said, you've got a shed in your backyard we never approved. Well, the shed was there when they bought the house. And they assumed it was grandfathered in or put in by the people who owned the house before them, but they didn't put it in. But the question is, how did the HOA people see it? You could only see it from inside the yard, or presumably if you went at the yard next door and looked through a little slat in the fence. Really? So these associations tend to be full of Karens who don't just want to speak to the manager, they want to be the manager, says a veteran journalist and popular culture expert whose book, Oh, Florida, chronicles the extremes of that state. They want to micromanage what everybody does and dictate who can park where and what kind of Christmas lights you can put up. Basically, anything that is different from what anybody else does, you're not allowed to do it. It's all about uniformity. Now they're either going to have to find another outlet, like joining their local Moms for Liberty chapter, or they'll be in there fighting to change things back the way it was. So he and experts grounded in real estate law acknowledge the need for a change in HOA regulations in Florida, and it will now include criminal penalties for blocking access to official records. And that's the part that I've heard a few stories about. So if you belong to an HOA, that means that you're a member, and your dues support the HOA, and the HOA runs the common elements and so on, and you help elect a board that runs the HOA. Well, the board running the HOA should have some records of what it's doing, its bookkeeping, its accounts and so on, and minutes of its meetings. And all of that stuff should be available to anybody in the HOA who wants to see it. And I've heard stories of people say, I'm a member of an HOA, and I asked to see the minutes of the last meeting. They said, we're going to charge you for that. Or, oh, you can come by and look at them, but you can't make copies. And it's like, what? That's insanity. So they cite the example of the Hammocks, a 5,500 home residential community in West Kendall, where at least 6 HOA members or their relatives were arrested following an investigation into an alleged $2 million theft, which was accompanied by a 400% hike in HOA fees. So the fees kept going up because the money wasn't there for some weird reason. There's always a lot of grousing and griping about how HOAs run things, how much they charge, and in the case of some of them, how they won't let people in to inspect their records. That caused a huge uproar, and of course, in the end, the reason they didn't want anybody to see the records is because it showed they were stealing money. Meanwhile, an eminent scholar in local government at the University of Florida's Levin College of Law believes the Hammocks scandal probably provided the impetus for the reforms, but framers quickly identified other issues. Usually you get legislation like this because constituents are concerned about an issue which can be traced to a scandal or lawsuit. And perhaps if that was a spark, once they got into it, they started considering other problems with HOAs, because most of these have nothing to do with fraud or even money. And he's right. And that's the thing. And there's a lot more to it than that. I'm going to stop there. Because HOAs, two things, is that HOAs very wildly, I used to say laws vary wildly from state to state. Rules vary wildly from HOA to HOA. I've talked to people who said, Steve, I'm in an HOA. I didn't even know they existed. I pay some de minimis amount each month, and I never hear from them. And every couple of years we have an election, and I don't have a problem with that. And then there's the other side of the coin, where, oh, by the way, did you know that in this community, this HOA, you're not allowed to change the color of the exterior of your house? So if you've got shutters, if you've got trim around the windows, the actual siding, the roof, those things can't change color. And if you repaint, you got to repaint the exact same color or a color from a selected palette. And I've had some people go, Steve, but that makes sense to me. Did you know that in some you can't even use curtains on the inside of your house of certain colors if they're visible from the outside? So they can walk by your house, look at your house and the curtains are drawn and go, oh, those curtains are the wrong color. You need to change those curtains. So now they're dictating what's happening inside your house. But the thing I'm always getting back to is homeowners associations are common. They're quite common out there. And in some states like Michigan, when you sell a home, you are required to disclose if you're a member of an HOA. So it's technically not possible legally for you to buy a house in an HOA without knowing it. Now, if they didn't disclose, That's an argument. But of course, the disclosure sheet is written and there's a box on it that says, is this house in an HOA? Yes or no? And if they checked yes and you say, I wasn't told, well, that form, you were given that form. So you got to check the form. But once you buy into an HOA, or if you're thinking about it, you need to understand you're going to be governed by these rules and you've got to read them. And I mentioned before, I was on the condo board of a condo I lived in years and years and years ago. And we would send warning notices to people who were violating the rules the worst. And there were people who really violated the rules. And so we'd send them a warning letter and say, this is a violation of the rules. Technically, we could fine you, but we don't want to. We'd rather have you just fix it and let's just kind of move on. And we had 2 or 3 people either write back to us or show up at a hearing or one of our meetings and say, I'd like to have a hearing on this. And the excuse we always heard was, I didn't know there were rules. And we're like, well, you know this is a condominium, right? You bought a condominium? And you know that condominiums, the way they work, is that, you own from the walls in, but from the walls out is common elements. People go, common what now? And they didn't know how that worked. And we're like, yes. So the reason that someone comes and mows your lawn in front of your unit is that we're taking care of that with the money you pay in dues. You know you're paying dues, right? Because you're cutting 2 checks. You're making payments on the condo and you're paying dues to somebody. And I had people go, okay, I understood that. And they go, okay, so you understand that there's an association here, condo association, just like an HOA, homeowners association, and there's all kinds of rules and regulations that go along with that. And I had people say, but I've never seen those rules. And the rules are incorporated into the title, the property, the actual deed, if you look at the paperwork that's filed with the county about who owns that property, it'll say, this is in a condo association or an HOA, and these rules will apply unless updated, pursuant to the rules. And so if you move into a homeowner association and you're thinking about it, I would advise you, before you say yes or no, that you take a look at the rules and decide, because I've had people tell me that, hey, there's rules in the books that don't get enforced. I don't care. But you don't know, number one, how they're going to get enforced unless you ask around. But number 2, and this is a bigger one, what if things change? What if a bunch of weirdos get on your board? And next thing you know, they're coming by and they're saying, hey, did you realize that your mailbox is the wrong color? Well, that's the mailbox that was there when I moved in. Too bad. It doesn't conform to our rules. So we're going to fine you $50 and $25 a day until you fix it. So you run to Home Depot, you get a new mailbox. You go, it's fixed. They go, fine, pay us $75. What? So that's a concern. And these things can happen. And I know people who are going to be watching this go, Steve, you're always so paranoid. I'm the attorney here. I'm paid to be paranoid. Because if I wasn't here telling you these horror stories, you might not realize what's possible. And so there is this HOA with over 5,000 homeowners in it. And 6 board members were arrested for stealing the money brought in to run the HOA. So that, of course, is probably the worst case example you could have of what they could do. But trust me, if you find yourself living your life where you wake up in the morning wondering if your garbage can fell over last night, you're going to realize that it ain't that much fun living here at all. So new laws in Florida, they've come in. The main thing they've done is they say, look, we're going to regulate the boards, and there's got to be a process where somebody who's been fined or dinged or whatever you want to call it, they don't use the word dinged in contracts, but I do. Not in contracts, just speaking. That they've got to have a process that makes sense and that's fair and in essence is due process. They're not the government. They don't owe you due process in that sense, except now they do because a law has been passed. So that's what happens when you swing that pendulum too far. So Richard Luscombe wrote it. Jeff and others sent it. Thanks a lot. Curbing the Karens, and I apologize, my friend's name Karen. Florida reins in over mighty homeowners groups, from The Guardian. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I do most of my work sitting down. That's where I shine.